I'm Bob Phillips. Back in 1983, I was asked to prepare a feature story for television about a Joplin firm that repaired department store mannequins. I didn't know it then, but from that beginning, I went on to do over 460 TV features, which were called the Phillips Files. Done in the four-state area, they aired between 1983 and 1997. Along with some talented photographers, we covered a lot of ground, traveling interstate highways and country lanes, up mountains and down hollers, to document the people, places, and things that make up this many-faceted area. Here, then, are a few of the Phillips Files. You say you'd like to get away from it all? How about a cruise on the Princess? This dual side-wheel excursion boat is a new water attraction on Lake Taneycomo. Since her debut here in April of '93, the Princess has been a tourist magnet. Built in Michigan in 1976, she cruised at several places up north before being purchased in Iowa by businessman Peter Greiner, who decided to move her to Branson. Since her 26-foot width was too much for hauling on most highways, she had to be cut in half lengthwise for the trip to Rockaway Beach, Missouri. Once there, it took 4 months to weld the two halves back together. The boat weighs 50 tons and is 62 feet long. Each paddle wheel is 16 feet in diameter. Diesel-powered, she cruises at 9 miles an hour. There are 5 excursions daily, covering 11 miles round trip. You can go up to the open observation deck to sightsee, or have breakfast, lunch, or dinner in the enclosed dining room on the main deck. The menu features gourmet fare. Paddle wheelers were once a familiar sight along the nation's waterways, but today the Princess is the only side wheeler still operating in the Midwest. Howard Greiner, the owner's father, is the primary pilot.
The original old side wheelers were all steam driven, and then you are into boilers and that type of thing, where this is a side wheeler, but it's hydraulic driven. It has the modern technology of a hydraulic hydrostatic drive system, and makes it very much safer. It would be quite a trip to run a steam driven side wheeler today with the rules and regulations, because they blew up quite regularly.
Coast Guard approved, heated and air conditioned, the Princess operates year round. During the cruises, passengers get a good look at several beautiful lakefront homes and can see several species of wildlife, such as ducks, geese, and majestic blue herons. As you glide gently along, you'll find that the beauty of the scenery, the hospitality on board, and the magic of an old side paddle wheeler add up to a unique experience. On Lake Taneycomo at Branson, Bob Phillips, KODE News. This is a 1953 Plymouth Cranbrook sedan. 500,000 of them were built, but this particular one is special. Why? Here's why. Because this still new car has only 30 actual miles on its odometer. It's currently displayed at Continental Chrysler Plymouth Dodge in Joplin. Recently, John Buxbaum, the owner of the dealership, gave us a close-up look at this remarkable survivor. Its inline straight-six engine generates 97 horsepower on leaded gas and still purrs like a kitten. The car has no carpeting, radio, or heater. Heaters were optional back then. The only accessory is the high-drive automatic transmission, which was a real innovation in those days. The instruction manual is still in the glove compartment, along with the factory nuts and bolts needed to attach the license plate. The interior is outfitted with mohair headliner and fabric seat covers. In 1953, the Cranbrook sold for $1,982, and came with a 90-day warranty. This one has an unusual history which began in Longview, Texas.
The story goes, it was stored in a dirt floor barn. A car dealership down there was struck by a tornado in 1953, and the owner had 23 cars that survived virtually unscathed. And he put the cars in a barn, and it seems like he must have just forgot about them. And the surroundings that it was stored in must have been just the right kind of climate for the car to survive in this kind of condition. We had the car trucked to us, and it got off the truck, and we turned the ignition, and it fired up, I think, faster than a new car would start these days. It's really needed nothing.
After sitting in the barn for 17 years, all 23 cars were put up for sale. Eventually, this one was bought in Illinois for $9,900. A previous owner had replaced the 4 main tires, which had deteriorated, but the spare in the trunk is original. John says there are no plans to sell the Cranbrook. It's for display only. But if ever offered for sale, its pristine condition and low mileage could easily command $13,000 or more. A reminder for car buffs, there are still 22 of these grand old-timers floating around on the market in new condition. Anyone lucky enough to buy one will have a real treasure. Bob Phillips, KODE News. These are kayaks, not the old Eskimo canoes of legend, but the latest in recreational watercraft. Since 1992, Hugh Simon of Knoll, known hereabouts as Kayak Jack, has been renting out these air-filled boats for float trips on nearby rivers and streams. Recently on Elk River, we got to see kayaks in action. Aluminum canoes have been the mainstay of float trips for decades. Sleek and fast, they're highly popular, but they do take some handling. The kayak is easy. You can paddle it or lean back and let the current do the work. Kayaks first appeared in the mid-1980s, designed for tough use on mountain whitewater rivers. They're constructed of Hypalon, a space-age polymer material covered with rubber. The flat bottom is made of neoprene. It's 12.5 feet long, 3 feet wide, and can carry 600 pounds. It has 5 separate air compartments, and even if it's punctured, the craft will stay afloat. By the way, an air-filled kayak is a lot easier on the anatomy than aluminum. Many people are leery of the aluminum jobs because they're rather easy to tip over. Not so the kayak. It will tip, but you really have to work at it. Hugh says kayaks are definitely user-friendly.
Your boat isn't going to sink, you're not likely to lose your possessions, and you'll be able to hop right back in wherever you are on the river. You can crawl in and out of these anytime you want along the river without dumping them over. These are very stable craft. The likelihood of you ever turning over is really small. Your kids don't have to sit rigid in one place. You know how fidgety kids can be. And I've had families take 2 of them out and the kids were jumping from kayak to kayak. Just having a ball. And that's the whole idea of bringing people out here on the river, just to relax and have a good time.
At present, there are only 10 rental kayaks in our area, and Hugh has them all. There aren't too many in private hands, due mainly to their present cost of $1,000 apiece. But as their popularity grows among boaters of all ages, you can expect that price to drop sharply in the near future. Though still relatively new, you can bet that kayaks are going to catch on fast. They're safe, comfortable, and easy to maneuver. Just the thing for a nice, easy float on a hot summer day. On Elk River near Pineville, Bob Phillips, KODE News. This is the River Otter, one of the most unusual boats on Grand Lake. It's a replica of an 1890 steam-driven launch, designed and built by Richard Meek of Joplin. Once important providers of transportation on the nation's lakes and rivers, steam launches today are just for fun. Richard, a retired aircraft designer and engineer, built his boat over a period of 10 years. He assembled the 5-horsepower single-cylinder engine from ready-made parts, but he built the boiler from the ground up. The hull, which took him 2 years to construct, is made of 4 layers of 1/8-inch laminated veneer. With room for 10 people, the River Otter is 25 feet long, 6.5 feet wide, and weighs 2 tons. It was launched in late 1992 on Grand Lake. During each cruise, Richard hovels over all the dials, valves, and gauges that keep the Otter perking along at 6.5 miles an hour. He also has to feed the boiler with blocks of scrap wood, which he says you can find anywhere. Bill Lowe serves as helmsman of the boat. Since Richard is usually so busy tending to the engine, he has little time to watch the steering. But always the innovator, he's invented a remote control device that allows him to steer the boat from the rear if necessary. I asked Richard if a boat such as this is practical nowadays.
It's practical in the sense that it's a fun boat. It's not real practical, it doesn't go that fast, but it's a displacement hull, and it's very stable, and it's a pleasant ride, and it's a good Sunday afternoon. And to me, it's practical because it's just a plaything, and I built it for that. And I always try to con somebody in to do the steering and take care of that. And I just play with my engine. That's the whole thing. It's entertainment for me.
Even though steam-driven boats aren't as practical as they once were, they can still be an enjoyable hobby. Richard keeps his Otter at Grand Lake. He takes it out for a spin about once a week, and he's still thinking up ways to improve it. Now that his steam launch is complete, I asked Richard if he'd consider building another one. Sure, he said, but not for a while. He wants to have a little fun with this one first. Aboard the River Otter on Grand Lake, Bob Phillips, KODE News. These vintage curling irons are part of a collection of hairstyling tools owned by Irma Hill of Neosho. A hairdresser for over 30 years, Irma has operated the Neosho Beauty College since 1982. She began her collection about 20 years ago, and today hundreds of these old instruments are on display at the college. Curling irons, hat pins, hair pins, combs, and the most impressive items, 2 electric permanent wave machines, which were the rage back in the 30s and 40s when perms cost $1. The 2 electrics are real collectibles, but Irma says they're also valuable teaching tools, since her students must know the history of these machines in order to pass their state exams. The electrics worked through a series of hot wires and metal clamps attached to the client's hair. Sometimes the machine would literally set the hair on fire. Cold wave perms made these old hair benders obsolete in the mid-1950s. A good thing, Irma says, since electrics were a pain in the neck for both hairdresser and client.
The hairdressers had to do a lot of work with metal, which is not really fun because of the chemicals they had to work with. Took a great deal of work to do it, and then it also took a lot for the client to sit in a chair hooked up to direct electricity and have those metal clamps clamped on their head, which burned them sometimes. Took all day, took a long time. It was a neat experience for them because they loved getting something new. It was the first time they'd ever been able to get curly hair when they had straight.
Irma has 2 other electric machines which were improvements over the old models. Here, the clamps were heated separately and then applied to the hair, a much safer method. Irma has over 100 old curling irons. When she began collecting, they cost about $1. Today, they can bring $20 or more. Here's one for the men, a heated mustache curler. Now that's real class. Irma is still looking for hairstyling memorabilia at area antique shops and flea markets. Often, people bring in items for her collection. In the old days, this machine used electricity. Today, it's obsolete. Back in the old days, these were operated manually. Today, they use electricity. It's an interesting paradox in the world of hairstyling, but then everything in Irma's collection is interesting. Some of it is unbelievable. In Neosho, Bob Phillips, KODE News. How'd you like to catch a few rainbow trout like this one? It's easy at the Ozark Trout Farm near Neosho. We stopped in there recently to visit with owner Bill Cushman and look over his operation. One of 12 commercial trout farms in Missouri, this is one of the oldest in the country, dating back to 1885. It's composed of a large growing pond and 4 fishing ponds. Here there are no worries about licenses or how many you can catch. Bill sells his trout for $2.75 a pound. For $3 a pound, he'll dress them for you. All fishing gear and bait is provided. Bill buys 100,000 trout eggs a year from a California firm. After hatching in indoor trays, the fry are moved to special holding tanks until they're 6 inches long. Then they go to the big growing pond to mature. There are some 40,000 trout swimming here every day, averaging a pound to a pound and a quarter. The water is perfect for them. It comes from an artesian spring at a chilly and constant 58 degrees. No pumps, aerators, or chemicals are ever used in the water, and the trout are fed organically.
Well, they are pellet fed. Now, we do let our fish eat natural food in the water also, but the being fed by pellets, they get a more balanced nutrition. They get all their vitamins and minerals that they need. They have a certain number of minimum requirements, like the oxygen in the water. They need 5% dissolved oxygen, and they have to have a cold running water. They don't like warm ponds, and they have to have, a certain amount of feed.
Open year-round, the farm is an ideal place for anglers of all ages. Kids especially like it because they seldom grow impatient waiting for a bite. Aside from the 8,000 customers who come here each year to catch fish to take home, Bill also supplies trout to supermarkets and restaurants as far away as Kansas City. Bill says the biggest trout ever taken weighed 6 3/4 pounds. With my luck, I'd never catch one that size, but the big boys are here, so it's worth a shot. In Neosho, Bob Phillips, KODE News. Doyle Heron of Pineville is one of this area's most unique artists. He's become widely known for his spike sculptures, whimsical little figures made from old 6-inch railroad spikes, some odd nuts and bolts, and pieces of 8-gauge wire. As far as he knows, he's the only craftsman who does this. After welding the steel arms and legs onto the iron spike, Doyle shapes it into one of literally hundreds of postures and situations. His catalog lists over 230 different figures, and he's thinking up new ones all the time. Blessed with the soul of an artist and a keen sense of humor, Doyle made his first spike figures in the mid-1950s, strictly as a hobby. But the comical little characters took on a life of their own, and when he retired in 1986, he and his wife Jerry made spike art a full-time business. To date, they've produced and sold over 20,000 of them. Among the most popular pieces are a befuddled electrician, a slam-dunking basketball player, a struggling but determined weightlifter, and a busy photographer lining up a shot. In each one, the human comedy with all its foibles is evident. It's hard to look at them and not smile. Doyle says he gets his inspiration by simply watching people.
Well, I watch, how they walk, how the joggers run, their reaction to various things when they eat. I'm just always interested in how their body motion is. And actually, I have noticed that that I am the guy I'm building often. And you know, if he's having fun, I have fun. If he's in pain, I'm feeling the pain. And we don't have any faces or hands, so we have to convey the message with the body English. And I need to know how they stand, how they move, whatever, to convey that.
The Herons are on the road 9 months a year, taking their iron men to art shows and craft exhibitions across the country where they sell like hotcakes, priced from $33 to $150 apiece. But you'll rarely see them for sale in stores. They must be purchased from the Herons by phone or mail order. Doyle and Jerry sell about all the spike art they can produce. Their pieces are immensely popular for good reason. They're clever, inventive, and funny. That's a winning combination. In Pineville, Bob Phillips, KODE News. Richard Ramsey of Neosho is an artisan who practices an ancient craft. He's a knife maker, and at his rural workshop produces several kinds: skinners, hunters, daggers, boot knives, and bowies. When we visited, Richard was forging and shaping blades from bars of spring steel using an old method called selective heat treating, the hand forging, hardening, and tempering of the metal. When this process is complete, the blade is carefully sanded smooth and polished to a high sheen. The handles are made from stag antlers, moose or elk horn, or from several types of exotic wood. A graduate of a professional bladesmithing school in Arkansas, Richard is today one of only 300 members of the prestigious American Bladesmith Society. He began making knives full-time a year ago, and since then has produced and sold over 100 of them for prices up to $150. There are two categories: the fancy collector or art knife, mostly for show, that's meant to hang on a wall or be placed in a display case. Then there are the working knives, skinning and hunting blades, which are actually used in the field. Whatever the type, Richard wants to make the knife a functional, rugged, and dependable tool.
Whether it's a basic using knife, as I call it, a working knife, or an art knife. But I like to see people use them and then come back and tell me, yes, that knife held an edge, and it does the work of a tool. It does what it's supposed to do, and that's what I like. But if they're collecting, like wall hangers or something to put in a showcase, that's fine too. But I still want my knife to perform if they want to take it out and use it.
Richard turns out a knife a day and often works on several at the same time. Aside from his normal production, he also fills custom orders. Tell him what kind of blade you want, and he'll make it. His knives are sold at craft exhibitions and at gun and knife shows all over this area. Richard is among a number of talented Ozark craftsmen who practice this ancient art. The knife is one of man's earliest tools, and today handsome blades like this remain practical and highly popular. In Neosho, Bob Phillips, KODE News. Jim Allen of Lamar is well known hereabouts for his awesome collection of toys. He has hundreds of them, but his primary interest is the old cast iron toys he remembers from childhood. Back then, you could buy one for 75 cents, but not anymore. Due to collector demand, they're now rare and very expensive. A super rare one can command up to $250,000. Cast iron toys appeared in America in the early 1900s, made by such companies as Arcade, Hubley, Kenton, and Marks. Jim bought his first one in 1980 and today owns 250 of them. His oldest one is a 1910 Hubley fire truck with wooden ladders that's worth $1,200. His most valuable is this red 1926 Kenton Coupe, 8 inches long, and recently appraised at $4,800. Most of the cast iron toy makers went out of business prior to World War II. The reproductions made today are constructed of pot metal, and though authentic in appearance, they aren't worth much. It takes a keen eye and a lot of know-how to tell a real toy from a fake. Even Jim, a highly knowledgeable collector, admits he's often been fooled by a sharp-looking reproduction.
They're coming in now with reproductions that I don't know whether I could tell the difference now or not. The price of the toys are expensive enough, the toys are expensive enough now that they are making reproductions that look just like the originals. I used to believe the dealer, but anymore I don't. There's dealers that will sell you reproductions for real ones. A legitimate dealer wouldn't, but you can get ripped off. Any toy show you go to, you can get ripped off.
Jim still searches for these vintage toys at toy and antique shows and estate sales. But he says they're difficult to find these days because collectors snap them up as soon as they appear for sale and then never turn loose of them. I asked Jim if he'd ever consider selling any of his collection.
I've never sold a toy. Just couldn't bear to part with it.
Despite the glut of whiz-bang toys on the market today, these grand old-timers can still command your attention. They may look pretty primitive, but to collectors like Jim, they're worth their weight in gold. In Lamar, Missouri, Bob Phillips, KODE News.